thank you all for coming today as we celebrate my father, John Teget's life. On behalf of our entire family, we appreciate you all coming today. Some of you guys have traveled a very long way and great distances, and that makes this whole thing even more special, and so we do appreciate it. We would kindly ask, if you haven't put your cell phone on silent, click it over to silent just in case. And I'm sorry that I'm on crutches and kind of slowing things down today, but my father has given me yet one more lesson, and doing it on his own time as opposed to what would have been better for me in 5 days. So anyway, thank you all so much for coming today. We do appreciate it. We're going to start now with Megan, who's going to come up and read the obituary and has a few remarks.
I don't know. Don't ask me. You're not sure about.
Good morning. I'm John's granddaughter, Megan. It is my honor to read his obituary today. John Teget, a lifelong Shenandoah resident, died at home September 13, 2023, at the age of 82 years. John was born on September 13, 1941, at Hands Hospital in Shenandoah to Marvin H. Budd and Kathleen Gwynn Holmes Teget, both of Shenandoah. He is survived by his wife Gail of Shenandoah, two sons, Paul and daughter-in-law Jennifer of Hays, Kansas, and Stephen and daughter-in-law Ann of Crete, Nebraska. Grandson Connor Teget of Denver, Colorado, granddaughter Megan Shrewsbury of Rochester, Minnesota, several other relatives, and many friends. John is preceded in death by his parents. John attended school in Shenandoah, graduating in 1959. He graduated from Grinnell College in 1963, then earned his law degree from the University of Minnesota in 1966. On September 16, 1967, John was united in marriage to Gail Elizabeth Duncan in Watomea, Minnesota. John practiced law in Des Moines and Sioux City before returning to Shenandoah to open his own practice. He was the attorney for Page 1 Rural Water District and was involved in his establishment and early installation. He also took the opportunity to join in the purchase of Ross Insurance Agency, renaming it Shenandoah Insurance. After the sale of his insurance business, John enjoyed providing charitable gifts to organizations through the Teget Foundation. The foundation was established by his parents and has subsequently been increased. The gifts have been primarily local in nature, so John often was able to see their impact. John enjoyed several avocations throughout his life, many involving young people. While in Des Moines as a JC, he organized the summer swim competitions and also worked with a local committee to establish the Big Brother program, where he served as an unofficial Big Brother. In Shenandoah, he served as chairman of the American Red Cross, district chairman of the Boy Scouts, and for 6 summers with his wife Gail as coach for the Shenandoah Summer Swim Program. He and Gail also hosted high school foreign exchange students through AFS. Over a span of 20 years, John and Gail hosted 5 AFS students: Lars Myra of Denmark, Pablo Alvarez of Spain, Philippe Crochu of France, Max Folster of Germany, and Henrik Biddisten of Denmark. In addition, there were many who came to spend time at Camp John and Gail, including Ronnie Fladseth of Norway. John championed libraries and served on the Shenandoah Library Board for 12 years, the District Library Board for 6 years, and was a member of the Iowa Library Association for 14 years. He also served as chairman of the Iowa Library Association Trustees Committee for 2 terms. While on the Shenandoah Library Board, he was involved in the acquisition of property adjacent to the library to provide space for an addition to or expansion of the library building. For many years, John and Gail wintered in Florida, where John volunteered as a desk clerk at the library and also served on the Board of Friends of the Marathon Public Library, where he was treasurer. He loved spending time with his family, enjoyed reading and learning, and always looked forward to his twice-weekly coffee discussions with the guys. John came into my life 13 years ago when my mom started dating Steve. He lovingly embraced me into his family, and I quickly grew fond of his quick wit and well-timed dialogues. Whenever our family was together, I was typically 30% engaged in the actual conversation and 70% engaged in whatever John was muttering under his breath. He had his ways, didn't he? Anyone who knows John know he had his particular preferences. For example, lunches at 12 noon, cocktails at 5 and not a minute before, and dinner was at 6:30. His checkbook was always perfectly balanced, and he read his Zits comic calendar every single day. This was an imperative part of the routine. Every year for Christmas, he had to have a Zits calendar. Some years it was easier to find than others. If it wasn't purchased early in the holiday season, it was often sold out. It almost became a competition between Steve and myself of who would find the calendar first. I'd go to the mall and see the seasonal pop-up calendar store. I'd immediately call Steve and say, "Did you get your dad's calendar yet? I found one." One of us would always find it and wrap it, although I'm not really sure why. John always knew what it was by the shape. This year will be different. We won't do our usual race to the store. Instead, I'll pass by the store at the mall and think about all the times that reminded me of John before. I'll think about the joy it brought him to tear off a page of that calendar every day, and how he'd save each and every page in his shoebox, organized by date and year, no doubt. John liked routine. It's one of the things I appreciated the most about him. He understood me when I talked about my color-coded planner and strict skincare regimen and bedtime routine, and I understood him when he'd get hangry if lunch was 10 minutes off schedule. Routine is important. Planning ahead is important. John planned for and lived a life full of love and laughter. I'm glad I was a part of it.
I'm Bill LeBear, and I'm part of John's coffee group that met every Tuesday and Friday. And I don't know where I'm going to go tomorrow, so figure that out. The coffee guys started meeting sometime after the COVID pandemic. We wanted to see other people, just like all of you wanted to see other people. So some of us began to meet at 9:30 at either Dave's house or Ed's house. And their houses seemed large enough so that we could have some space between us. Remember the old 6-foot distancing thing that we went through. John drove himself the first few times, but it quickly became too much for him. So we began to give him rides, even if it was just down to Dave's house, which is just 2 blocks away. And eventually it became a struggle for him just to go from the car to the front door. So we settled in for the duration at his place. The coffee group was and is a diverse group of men. Everybody has their own personality and special knowledge. Nick Bosley, if you're here this morning, this is about you. He said he's one that he was the youngest one, and he has 2 daughters in school, so we found out what was going on there. He was also the final authority on any sports question that we had. Nick usually left early to go to work, and we cheered him on. He was the only one contributing to our Social Security. Ed told us what was going on, or what he remembered from being on the hospital board. Craig Harris had all the up-to-date hospital information. Dave Scholl could tell you who was related to whom in most of Southwest Iowa. And John, well, we called John the professor. Not only did he provide topics of conversation, but he would tell us when we were wrong. For instance, he reminded us prostate has only 1 R. Clorinda has an L in it. Pronounce it, it's not Crinda. It was like being in school again, and nobody ever corrected John. We talked about some of the trips we'd taken. Bill Danforth and Jim Clark, as we speak, are now camping and hiking in Yellowstone, and they'll have good stories to tell us when they come back. Dave would tell us about his daughter-in-law's parents who are surviving in Ukraine. The conversations were all over the place. You couldn't finish one thought before being interrupted by someone way off in a different direction. It drove John nuts. So were there times when he would just stop and say he didn't know what we were talking about and go back and start over all over again. John's chair was just inside the door. And of course he was on oxygen all the time. He had a long tube that ran from his chair across the floor underneath the room and disappeared into his bedroom where we knew the machine was that provided his oxygen. Those that were there knew where the cord was. It was about 20, 25 feet long, and we would step over it. It was transparent. We usually stepped over it. Sometimes we would forget. Newcomers wouldn't even notice it sometimes. So once in a while, someone would stand on it for an ungodly amount of time. Did we say anything? Nope. We just looked at John and waited for him to change color. I'm not sure John even noticed. Then there were the pigeons. Ed Cloverdance raised pigeons, and he took John out there once in his four-wheeler. They were in a big grain bin that he'd converted. And he asked John if he wanted to go inside, and John said, no, not for my lungs. So John, he told Ed, I really don't like pigeons. That sent Ed off. And from that time on, he called his pigeons Teget birds. And when Ed brought up the Teget birds at coffee, John would object, but to no avail. John finally gave up and just gave the eagle eye to Ed or some other appropriate gesture. We had visitors, good ones, who had different flavors to our conversations. There was a former AFS student, Pablo from Spain. Rick and his two boys came, added a lot, I thought, to our conversations. John's grandson, Connor, came a couple of times. We showed him what it was going to be like in old age. Steve and Paul came with their wives, Ann and Jennifer. And Gail sometimes dropped in for a few minutes. Always enjoyed her comments and her insight. Well, I'd like to think the coffee guys made John's final years, months, weeks, even days a little more normal, and that he knew that he had many friends who cared about him. Our lives are enriched knowing him.
Hello. I just want to say again, thank you so much for coming. It really means a lot to us as a family to see so many people that Baba impacted in his life. So, as I've been thinking about things to say about my grandfather, I told my dad that it's so hard to fit all I want to say about him in a short speech because of his impact on me, the community, and his family. For as long as I can remember, I've called him Baba. I'm not sure where my younger self came up with that name, however, it has stuck. Recently, my dad made the unfortunate mistake of asking Baba if he would like to be called a different name. So, in Baba's low, rumbling tone, he chewed my dad's butt. And when I called him later that week, the first words out of his mouth were, "Do you not want to call me Baba anymore?" And I told him, I do. I never had thought about changing it. That was his name to me, and that's what it will always be. He told me he loved it because I gave it to him, and that it was my name for him, and that I was to never change, and that was the one demand he ever made of me to my face. To me, Baba's greatest gifts were his ability to listen and ask great questions. I always enjoyed the first evening of my visits with my grandparents Teget the most because he would sit there and ask good question after good question about anything going on in my life as well as my thoughts on things happening in the world. And he would just sit there and watch and listen as Vivi and I spoke. I've seen him do this with everyone he meets over the years. My friends, family members, his friends, and it's just amazing how engaged he can be when he never says a word outside of asking another question. The first night, on my most recent visit to Shenandoah, we were doing our typical first night routine of many questions over drinks, dinner, and a TV show, which was always scheduled, as Megan said. Towards the end of the night, Mimi had gone to bed, and he turned to me and said, "Do you have any questions for me?" It was finally my turn to listen to my grandfather talk and learn things that I didn't know about him, as well as gain his insights on the world as it stands. I'm so glad he asked me this, because it was a full circle moment where I turned from the question to the questioner. Baba to me is the definition of a Teget man. He set an example for me every day on what that means. He did this primarily through his actions, giving me life advice, as well as raising my dad with the same virtues that were passed down to him. He instilled in my dad, as well as my uncle, the necessity of learning how to learn, read, and write, which has been preached to me for as long as I can remember. I was good at learning and reading, but not so much writing. I'm sure most of you know Baba was a stickler for grammar and an excellent writer. So when I began applying to college, I asked Mimi and Baba to help me with my application essay. And boy, I didn't realize the mistake I made. Over 2 weeks and 3 different essays, I sent over 40 renditions of the essays back and forth to them, and would find endless red marks all over each new version, slowly increasing. In hindsight, this made me an average writer for my age, and has helped me improve tremendously at writing. When I graduated college, I made sure to thank Baba for his help on that one essay, because without it, I don't think my GPA would have been as high as it was, nor would I be where I am today as a writer. Because of these lessons and many more that I sadly don't have the time for or the words, Baba put forth an excellent example for my dad and my uncle, as well as myself, on what it means to be a man with the last name of Teget. I want to thank you all again for coming to celebrate a man's life that I am so incredibly proud to call my grandfather. It is amazing to see all the people his life touched in a way that only he could pull off. Thank you.
Thanks again for coming. I'd like to take a special moment to thank Bill Avera for participating as the spokesperson for the Coffee Guys. And I'd like to take a chance or a moment also to just express my most profound thanks and gratitude to them for their willingness and to come and help visit Dad and to help facilitate those visits weekly. It was his highlight of his week, and I frequently learned of something discussed during their chats, and occasionally giving assignments to research so that he could discuss them again with the following coffee appointment. He enjoyed all of you very much. Steve and I had a great dad. He could be, as those who knew him, somewhat eccentric and eclectic. He had some very interesting superstitions to which he held very tightly. He avoided crossing the path of a black cat at almost any cost, which occasionally required some very creative vehicular maneuvering. He hated the Friday the 13th, and the fact he didn't like Friday the 13th was ironic, as he was convinced that he was actually born on a Friday the 13th in September of 1941. However, I fact-checked him, and it was actually a Saturday. Dad was, as Connor has pointed out, was exacting and precise. Megan's pointed out too, and in many things in life, especially in this quest for clear and reasoned thinking, good grammar, and good writing, and the ability to learn. He was unapologetic for correcting others' grammar in conversations. Corey and Sawyer know this better than most. And when in large groups, when I'd be sitting next to him, if people were speaking, I would often hear him grumbling under his breath when poor grammar was being used. Most of all, what he was a natural teacher. And I often think that a classroom would have been his most natural home rather than business. I remember the incredible patience he demonstrated while he taught me to drive. The very first night I got my learner's permit, we were driving on the freeway from Shenandoah to Yankton to visit my grandparents' Teget. It was between Missouri Valley or Council Bluffs area all the way up to Sioux City on the interstate in the dark. Mom was terrified and was quite convinced this wasn't his best ideas. Subsequently, as a nurse, she self-medicated with Dramamine and hope to However, I couldn't see this because I was white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Steve reports she was white-knuckled and clawing at the back of the seat. That example, though, taught me how to be a father. And while I'm sure I wasn't perfect, I think I had an excellent mentor. Dad had a love for learning. He passed his love for learning not only on to Steve and me, but to others around him. He wanted to make sure that others had the opportunity to learn. Much of what Dad directed with the Teget Foundation is around that. He, after retiring to sell his insurance agency, he got involved in the library because he recognized libraries were key for learning. He was involved with the Iowa State Library Board, and he preached that libraries and good books were the link to knowledge and adventure and to the limitless travel of the human mind. His real passion, however, was for people. He loved talking to people. He loved helping youth. He loved in-depth discussions and really learning about an individual. He had the ability to talk to anyone and ask deeper questions to help people learn about themselves and others. He used that talent with AFS for over 20 years, being sort of their problem solver. Mom helped as well with this. He shared his talent and ability with other friends of mine through all phases of their life, and I'm quite sure they didn't know the profound impact he had on folks that I am now only learning about the influence he did wield. Social media is an interesting topic, and one I'm sure that the coffee guys likely broached. However, how it affects society and permeates it both positively and negatively we're still all learning about. However, social media and its ability to reach large numbers of people simultaneously has now made me aware of the widespread impact Dad had on so many others. I'm sure he didn't know how profound the effect his various interactions were with people. However, I know that he'd be pleased and honored to learn that he had provided some useful guidance and help in life. Most assuredly, it would have been flattered to learn that folks considered him family, and his ability to have conversations and ask these insightful questions while maintaining a high standard created these families. I hope folks don't think I'm advocating my responsibility in writing my eulogy by reading some of the messages I received. Ed Cloverdance always referred to him as the professor, as Bill said, during their morning coffee times with the fellows. I think some of the message I received from friends about my dad will demonstrate why he was so professorial and father-like to many. Rick Beeson called Dad Father John, and I suspect that Rick got plenty of parental advice. However, it wasn't until I was contacted by numerous college friends that I realized even more how many lives Dad and Mom had touched. My friend Steve Kranz said that Dad and Mom were surrogate parents for everyone in our fraternity. Another friend, Danny Dye, wrote, he was truly a larger-than-life figure who loved those who came into his orbit. How else could he have adopted us all? Another college friend, John, wrote to me, quote, I must say your dad is seriously one of the reasons I listen to youth as intently as I do. John is a karate instructor. I will never forget him sitting down with me in the chapter room and asking about me. I never met an adult as interested in every person who was in front of him the way your dad was. He genuinely wanted to get to know you and make you feel as if you were the only person in the room, which could also be a bit intimidating. And it really made you feel heard and that you had value, even as a silly, rebellious, somewhat stupid college kid in John's case. His life lessons live on, John says, in someone like me who knew him relatively little, but found his way with others profoundly special. Another college friend, Andy, posted, a good man passed this week, one who, for many young men just like myself, offered a portrait of a male role model at a time when such role models were desperately needed. While a generation or more ahead of me, I saw him as a shining light, the way out of some very dark moments. I called him Sir in every engagement, even to his protest, because he indeed deserved the respect. Like a prolonged rolling thunderbolt, his absence will be felt by me and a whole generation of brothers who needed that portrait to work from. Thank you, sir. I love you. I love your family. We will meet again. In his passing, Dad continues to teach me one final lesson. The lesson of profound impacts we have on one another and how even seemingly benign and small interactions can have long-lasting ripple effects like a stone in the water. He wasn't just a dad to Steve and me. He was a dad and a father to many others, for which we all benefited. Thank you, Dad, for your patience, understanding, seemingly endless questioning, consistent discipline, and love. You are dearly missed already, but you will not be forgotten. Your presence is felt and will continue to be felt by many. Your legacy will live on in many ways. I love you. Thank you for being my dad.
My dad was a lot of things in life. He worked as a lawyer, then an insurance agent. He was an active volunteer, and he loved philanthropy. But to me, and I'm sure to many people who are here today, he was most of all a teacher. To simply call him a lifelong learner is to sell him short. He was a relentless consumer of information. He perused multiple newspapers daily, read thousands of books, and more recently binge-watched more TV shows than most millennials on a really impressive variety of streaming services. And it was impossible for him to keep all this information to himself. He loved nothing more than to share something interesting he just learned. Most days I'd wake up to an email in my inbox. John Teget has shared an article with you. It was always on a topic that he thought I might find interesting. When we come for a visit, or even have a phone call, he'd often have a list of books or other information that he couldn't help sharing. It was the teacher in him. He just couldn't help himself. As a child, he helped teach me basic life lessons, things like how to tie my shoes, how to ride a bike, or how to swim. He taught me responsibility for my actions and that it's important to spend less money than I earn. Every morning before school, I couldn't leave the house until we'd gone over my spelling list, and I spelled each word correctly. After all, Friday's spelling test was coming. In this, I also learned that it's important to continually prepare. Spelling tests are on Fridays. Life, though, doesn't tell you when the test is. The tests are coming, so it's best to be ready. As I became more independent and went off to college and later in my career, my dad taught me the importance of having systems. After all, he had a system for everything. He was the king of systems and routines. For years, he recorded the daily temperature, his blood sugar readings, the title and author of every book he'd read. He even recorded every single food he's eaten for at least the last 25 years. You want to know what he had to eat on this date 10 years ago? I looked it up, I can tell you. He had toast with peanut butter and orange juice for breakfast, a piece of ham with some toast and milk for lunch, and for dinner a hamburger and a bun with tomatoes, no doubt the fresh tomatoes purchased here at the Shenandoah Farmers Market that he loves so much. But you know what? Using systems and routines has served me well also. I don't record every single thing I eat, but my car keys go in the exact same spot every day, and I've never lost them, knock on wood. My passport's in a zipper bag in my backpack, and I develop detailed spreadsheets, including estimated travel times and weather forecasts for every trip we take. My dad taught me how to genuinely show interest in other people. Over the years, I've watched him conduct full-on interviews, interrogations, of relatives, foreign exchange students, his friends, my friends, restaurant servers, bartenders, even flight attendants. Basically, anybody who came within earshot was fair game. His questions didn't come from a place of nosiness. He was genuinely interested in learning about their lives and knowing more about who they were and where they come from. Many of those people he intensely interviewed, like his neighbor Rick, along with his wife and sons, his foreign exchange students, his helper Anna, my wife, our daughter, those people became family. He also taught me to embrace change. He was in his late 70s when he got the courage to walk into an Apple store and make the switch from Android to iPhone. He wasn't thrilled he had to learn new ways to do things on his new phone, but he did. Because sometimes, while difficult, change can be good. More recently, he imparted to me one of his most important life lessons. Go live your life. Take the trip. Enjoy the show. Savor the moment. After all, these are the things that build meaningful relationships and create memories. In October of 2021, Ann and I had planned a Caribbean cruise. When we told Mom and Dad about it and the fantastic deal we gotten on the cruise, we invited them to come with us, and they were excited to go. Dad knew that his health was declining and it might be one of the last opportunities he'd have to take Mom on a vacation. So he took the trip. He saw the shows, and we all savored every single moment together. On one of the last nights of the cruise, we were sitting in the lounge listening to an acoustic guitarist. Dad was there perched atop his scooter sipping a cocktail and was unusually quiet. Ann asked him if everything were all right or something was wrong, and he leaned over and smiling said, "Nothing's wrong at all. I'm just sitting here listening to the beautiful music, watching the pleasure wash over me." And that's how we'll remember him. But I'll miss my dad. I'll miss the newspaper articles he sent me. Interesting topics to be sure, but more important, a reminder that I was in his thoughts first thing most mornings. I'll miss calling him to tell him about our most recent travel adventure and even the inevitable 152 questions that he'd have about his trip. My dad was a man who loved life, loved his family and friends, loved learning. He was a man who taught us to go live our lives, and he would want nothing more than for all of you to live yours to the fullest. At this time, just my dad was didn't attend church regularly, but he was spiritual, and we would like, out of respect for various faith traditions, to please have a moment of silence. Thank you. On behalf of our family, especially our mom, Gail, thank you all for coming again today. Your presence here and your kind words and gestures have been of a tremendous comfort to all of us. We hope that you'll stick around and join us for refreshments here at the funeral home immediately following the service. And for those of you staying in town, you're also invited to come by the house at 706 Church Street from 1 to 3 today. Again, thank you for being here with us today as we remember my dad, John T.